Everyone? How was everybody's lunch? Good. Hope everybody's not too sleepy, never ate too much. Okay, we'll get right into business. Government motions. The Honorable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, second by the Minister of Health, that the 8th order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Carried. Order number 8, an act to amend the Civil Service Superannuation Act, Bill number 44, ordered for second reading.
The Honorable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, second by the Minister of Health, that this House do now resolve itself into a committee of the whole. Oh, for second reading, sorry. I move, second by the Minister of Health, that the said bill be now read a second time.
Shall it carry?
Bill number 44, an act to amend the Civil Service Superannuation Act, read a second time.
The Honorable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, second by the Minister of Health, that this House do now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry? I'll ask the Honorable Member from Tignish Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, to chair the
I wouldn't mind, not now, but some. The House is now in a committee of the whole House to take into consideration a bill to be intituled an act to amend the Civil Service Superannuation Act. Do you have a stranger? A request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted? Granted. Good evening. Would you please state your name and title for Hansard, please?
Terry Hogan, Manager of Pensions and Benefits.
Thank you very much. And Promoter, would you like to start with just a general statement on the bill's intent?
Sure. So there are basically three parts to this bill. The first one is to change the name from the Civil Service and Superannuation Act to the Public Sector Pension Plan Act. The second part is that it would allow the Plans Commission to engage the Auditor General or private accounting firms to conduct its audits, modernize the language within the Act, and deal with some housekeeping matters. So,
thank you very much. Honourable members, would it be your pleasure just to go section by section, or just the bill as a whole for questions? Just as a whole? Okay. So the floor is now open for questions. If anyone has any questions, so Summerside Wilmot.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for being here to answer questions on this. I'm just looking over, and I am curious if you can tell me about the investment policy that we have. I see under Section 5(4) of the Act that the fund shall be held in trust by the Minister and shall be invested by the Minister in accordance with the investment policy approved by Lieutenant Governor and Council. And I'm just wondering what the policy is.
So, my understanding is, and Terry can correct me if I misspeak, but the investments are done. You know, there are companies hired, firms hired to actually do the investment for us. Is that right? Terry. So it would be up to them as to where the investments were made.
Somerset Wilmot?
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
According to what I'm reading, it sounds like these decisions are made in accordance with an investment policy that is put forward from our end. Is it possible for us to have a copy of that investment policy?
We're gonna post it on our website
Go
shortly.
ahead.
Yes, there was
You
a,
have to talk to them.
sorry. Yes, there is we call it the SIP&P, the Statement of Investment Policies and Procedures, and that, there's an investment committee that makes recommendations to the minister and on to executive council, and they review that policy annually, and we're in the proceeds of posting that policy on we just launched a new website last week, and we'll post that policy within the week.
Somerset Wilmot?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that answer. I do understand it's very unnatural to speak away from me, so I apologize for how uncomfortable that is. I'm particularly wondering how government makes sure that the things that it's invested in are aligned with its values. So, for example, this government recently made an announcement that it was going to reach carbon neutrality in 2040 and is going to reach carbon neutrality in terms of energy by 2030. And those are ambitious goals that I'm very supportive of. I'm wondering if you can tell me what percentage of our investments are currently invested in fossil fuels?
1.3%.
Somerset Wilmot?
Thank you, Chair. How are those stocks performing?
Well, I'm guessing that, not overly well, but I'm guessing they're also part of maybe a mutual fund or a conglomeration of investments. They were at 2% the last time this was brought up in the legislature, now they're at 1.3%, and we would look to the investors to, it's hard to opt out of a mutual funds, for instance, that has some energy stock without opting out of everything else. So it's always a balance as to what's performing well and what's not. And I said it earlier in the legislature, I'll say it again. If we're looking to hire investors who are going to invest a lot of money in oil and gas right now, it's probably not the best advice because, oil and gas is not doing well. So.
Somerset Wilmot?
Thank you, Chair. I would completely agree with that. I'm just curious if anywhere in the investment policy it outlines ensuring that we are in alignment with the objectives of the province.
I think that it's early days as far as that goes, but it's definitely a conversation that I can have as minister with the people that we look to do the investment for us.
Somerset Wilmot?
Thank you, Chair. Are there discussions within government of divesting our assets of fossil fuels?
Well, I think because it's only 1.3% that it hasn't been a priority, but it's definitely something that I can bring to the table.
Somerset Wilmot?
Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. Stratford Mermaid? Or Mermaid Stratford?
That's okay. I'm just waiting. I'm not sure if that is on. I'm good. Thank you, Chair. So Section 5, it adds the requirement for audits as part of the annual reports. What was the current practice around that?
Currently, the pension plans are audited by the Auditor General on an annual basis.
Mermaid Stratford?
Okay, and so it's adding the requirement for audits as part of the annual report. So were they audited annually prior to this?
Yes, the amendment, this plan is audited every year by the Auditor General. What this plan clarifies is that the pension plan can be audited by the Auditor General or a private sector plan if necessary. And that was always the case, it was just never clear in the language.
Mermaid Stratford?
Okay, and so just to ask, the Financial Administration Act requires audited financials to be completed 3 months after the end of the fiscal year. Can you tell me how your performance is around that?
Yeah, and that's part of the reason we have this amendment is that we've done a number of things not this plan, but the sister plan, the teacher's plan, received a letter from the Standing Committee seeking some information how they were going to be compliant. And there's two parties involved. One is the administration and the minister's department, and one is the auditor. And those two have to go hand in hand to meet those deadlines. They haven't been met of late. We're working on that. One of the aspects is if the Auditor General just simply doesn't have the resources to meet it this gives the pension plan an alternative to try to address that issue you raised.
Member Stratford?
So is it fair to say that if this amendment passes, that going forward, this will be in compliance with the Financial Administration Act and reported on time?
There's two, I can only speak to our side of the operation, which is the administration, and we can meet our deadlines. I can't speak for the auditors.
Member Stratford?
Right, but if you have the opportunity to go to an outside auditor, an external auditor, so is it fair to say that, yes, we'll meet the timeline set out in the Act?
That would be possible, yeah.
Okay.
Member Stratford?
And can you also speak to the annual report? So are the annual reports up to date for this area?
No, they're not, and part of the reason is because we can't issue the annual reports until the financials are published, and so we're actually in the process of cleaning up and catching up all of those. We hope to have those materially caught up before the end of the calendar year.
Member Stratford?
And what was the last time that the annual report was tabled in the legislature?
I'd have to go back, but some of them are back into 16, 17, and some of them there were double audits done in an attempt to catch up, and so that has backed up. We just received, I think, up to the end of 18, just in September, and we're working on the most recent one, so we're trying to bundle them up and get them through.
Okay.
Member Stratford?
Thank you, Chair. And so is it the intent that it'll be fully up to date by the end of the fiscal year?
We won't be fully up to date by the end of this year. We'll be caught up except for the current year, and it'll be the current year that we have to focus on in conjunction with the auditor to be able to catch up. We're getting close.
Member Stratford?
Thank you for that. And I appreciate challenges around that, and that updating the legislation will hopefully provide more flexibility to meet those timelines. But those timelines are set out in legislation. So I would just kind of point out that if we are several years behind, and if any other departments are several years behind, that, you know, that cleanup is important to be compliant with the Act, right? So I appreciate your answers on that, thank you. For section 10, amending the 7.34 and 7, what's the effect of that change?
That's relating to, that's a housekeeping item. There's an error in the legislation. When we do annual evaluations every April 1st, and that annual evaluation has an impact on the following calendar year's inflation adjustments for retirees and active members. And the legislation referred to the year following the year after. It was actually 1 year too far out. We're pulling it back so that it's the January 1st immediately following the evaluation in April.
Okay, all right, I don't have any further questions, thank you.
You're welcome. Leader of the third party.
So basically, these are most housekeeping changes. I just wanted to ask a question on how the pension fund is doing through this traumatic time. Are you finding, like, are we getting value for our money right now? Where do you see things going? Go ahead. I know that's probably a tough one.
Well, I think the plans are doing what they were designed to do. There was pension reform back in 14, and they intentionally were designed to handle financial hits like this. Now, we've had a couple of big ones, and this one was severe. I'll talk to the civil plan. Prior to COVID, we were at 122% funded. Our measurement date was April 1st. That was maybe a few weeks after the low, and we slipped down to 112. But since then, we don't have our numbers at the end of September, but we anticipate we're back up around 117 in that range.
And where do you like to be, 110?
Well, everybody's happy when it's above 110, because that is the first threshold where retired indexation is impacted, and we didn't slip below it for either plan. So, the plans took a hit and they rebounded. So they did their job, but, you can only take so many hits.
Sure.
Leader of the third party.
No, that's it for now, thank you.
Okay, Leader of the opposition.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just follow on that line of questioning, Terry, while we're at it. I've been around long enough to remember when it was substantially underfunded, and one of the biggest expenditures 1 year was in order to correct that. So it's good news to hear that we're now back 117. Did you say it was approximately where we are? Okay. Okay, that's great. I recognize and I appreciate you saying that you will have a policy available for us, I think you said the end of this week, but presumably we're operating on a current policy, government policy, and I'm wondering whether that could be made available to us.
Oh, for sure. Sure. Yeah, sorry, the clarification was we're going to post it on the website. It's certainly available in hard copy.
Okay. That
Leader
would
of
be
the
great.
Opposition?
Sorry, thanks, Chair. And I'm never having looked at that policy, I'm wondering what sort of things are in there. Does it contain principles on which you base your investment choices, like ethical investing, or is it more market-based?
It's not really my, I deal with the liability side, I don't really deal with the asset side. I sit on that committee as a member, but I'm not intimate with that document to the point of somebody on the investment side. But in general, it lays out your range that you're going to invest in a fairly broad level on equities, in infrastructure, real estate, bonds, etc. There will be some limitations on what percentage you can hold in any one stock or sector. There will be, there is no specific prohibition on any stocks that it can hold. There is a filter for ethical and sustainable investing, and I sit on that committee, and the committee is already underway reviewing what's the most prudent way to move forward, given the concerns that are raised about oil and gas. If they aren't performing, they will eventually find their way out of the plan. So, you know, that's something that's up, but I'm not on the investment, management side, so I can't go too deep.
Leader of the Opposition?
Thank you, Chair. The information that you can get on the website regarding the plan suggests that it's returned about 3.6% average over the last 5 years. How does that compare to the performances of funds in other provinces?
I wouldn't be able to comment. Like, every plan is so different, depends on their asset mix and how they're invested. We tend to look at the since inception numbers that we publish are closer to 7. And those tend to go back probably 10 years, maybe. But as far as comparing it to others, I'm not in a position to provide you that.
Okay.
Leader of the Opposition?
Thanks, Chair. So you just said, Terry, that 7 would be considered to be a reasonable return on the portfolio.
That's our since inception number.
Okay.
To put in context, we need to make 5.5% to break even.
Yeah.
So if our since inception is running at 7, we're building up over the long term. That number that you cited is depends when the measurement date is. If it's coming right after a downturn, it would be pulled down, those 4 or 5 year numbers.
Yeah, I realised I just misread that actually, Terry, and I apologise. 3.8% return over the last 5 years. So, but still well below the 5.5 that we need to break even. Does that concern you at all?
We've since had a bounce back, and we've grown the fund by 5% since March. So it's very end date sensitive when you pick those numbers. And again, I'm not the investment expert, so I probably shouldn't go too deep into it.
Leader of the Opposition?
Thanks. And I'm just wondering, when you were drafting this bill, whether you consulted with BSC and with the various unions represented in government.
Both this bill and the next bill, the teacher's bill, are all governed and administered by commissions, and the commissions are populated by representatives from the unions and the retirees and the employers. And those boards both make these recommendations up to the ministers for these changes, so they would have all been vetted through.
Good. That's great. Thanks,
Leader of
Chair.
the
Thank you.
Opposition?
I'm good. Thank you, Chair.
Are there any other questions? Shall the bill carry?
Carry.
I move the title.
An act to amend the Civil Service Superannuation Act. Shall it carry?
I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry?
Mr. Chair, I move that the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill agreed to without amendment.
Shall it carry? Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, having under consideration a bill to be intituled, an act to amend the Civil Service Superannuation Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed to same without amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry?
Inside.
The Honorable Minister of Finance and Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Agriculture, Justice and Public Safety, that the 7th order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Order number 7, an act to amend the Teachers Superannuation Act, Bill number 45, ordered for second reading.
The Honorable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Agriculture, Justice and Public Safety, that the said bill be now read a second time.
Shall it carry?
Bill number 45, an act to amend the Teachers Superannuation Act, read a second time.
The Honorable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Agriculture and Justice and Public Safety, that this House do now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry? I'll ask the Honorable Member from Tignish, Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, to chair, please.
The House is now in a committee of the whole House to take into consideration the bill to be intituled an act to amend the Teachers Superannuation Act. Are you bringing someone onto the floor? Okay. A request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted?
I think you'll recognize him. He was just here.
Good evening. Could you please state your name and title for Hantford, please?
Terry Hogan, Manager of Pensions and Benefits.
Thank you very much, Terry. And could you just, I know it's difficult to speak. We have a natural tendency to want to look at them when we're speaking to someone face to face. But unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we're set up this way within the restrictions, so we have to deal with it. But if you could just try to speak into the microphone as much as you possibly can, would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. Honourable members, is it the pleasure of the committee that the bill be just open for general questions? Yeah, that's right. Okay. So the floor is now open. Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
You had mentioned with the last one that my question was going to be if there was consultation done with the teachers union, but your answer from the last question about consultation, you answered and said that they were both under the joint committee?
Sorry, both bills have their individual commissions that administer each plan, and the Teachers Commission would have reviewed these amendments and would have recommended them to the minister.
And, Chair. So, I mean, I've got a list here of who's on the Teachers Superannuation Commission membership. Of course, it will be renamed to the Teachers Pension Plan membership, and the commission, I should say. So the chair is a Deputy Minister of Education, Lifelong Learning. The vice chair is the Director of Finance Administration, Education, Lifelong Learning. Then we got a teacher representative, 2 PEITF representatives. We've got a couple of employer representatives, one from Justice and Public Safety, one from Finance, and then a retiree representative from Retired Teachers Association, and then 2 ex officio reps. One would be Terry, and the other one is principal at Morneau Chapelle Limited.
Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you for that. And I'm wondering if there's anything, if there's much difference between this bill and the last bill.
They're virtually identical, except for that question that was raised in the civil about changing that January 1st date that was too far out and pulling it back. That was an issue that was unique to the civil. Other than that, they're pretty well identical.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
That's good, Chair. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Are there any other questions? Shall this bill carry?
Take it here. Oh, I moved the title.
An act to amend the Teachers Superannuation Act. Shall it carry?
Carried.
I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Legislative Assembly of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry?
Carried.
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill agreed to without amendment.
Shall it carry? Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, having under consideration the bill to be intituled an act to amend the Teachers Superannuation Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed to same without amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall carry.
Carried.
The Honorable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move second by the Minister of Health that the fourth order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Order number 4, an act to amend the Labour Mobility Act, Bill number 40, ordered for second reading.
The Honorable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move seconded by the Minister of Health that the said bill be now read a second time.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Bill number 40, an act to amend the Labour Mobility Act, read a second time.
The Honorable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move seconded by the Minister of Health that this House do now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
The Honorable Member from Tignish Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker, the Chair.
You have somebody to bring on the floor. Now in a committee of the whole House to take into consideration the bill to be intituled an act to amend the Labour Mobility Act. Request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted? Granted. Good evening. Would you please state your name and title for answer, please?
Yes, Cal Whitnell, Executive Director, Economic and Population Growth.
Thank you very much. And Promoter, would you like to commence with a general statement on the bill's intent?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. This bill and act to amend the Labour Mobility Act, Bill number 2020, updates obsolete references to the Agreement on International Trade, AIT, which was replaced by the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, CFTA, in 2017. Amending the Act will correct references to the CFTA and maintain the validity and enforceability of the Act. The Act helps the province to ensure professional regulatory authority compliance with the CFTA, enables the province to meet its labour mobility obligations under the CFTA.
Thank you. And honourable members, is it the pleasure of the committee that the bill not be read clause by clause, section by section, or as a whole? Okay. Floor is now open for questions. Cornwall Meadowbank.
Just a quick question. Not really references, but has procurement through the Canadian Free Trade Agreement changed in the past 2 years?
Updates were made in 2017. Agreement on internal trade was renegotiated, and negotiations started in 2014, and the new Canadian Free Trade Agreement made substantial changes to procurement obligations.
Cornwall Meadowbank.
That's fine, thanks.
Any other questions? Shall the bill carry?
Carry.
Just right here. I move the title.
An act to amend the Labour Mobility Act. Shall it carry?
Carried.
I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor in the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry?
Mr. Chair, I move that the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill agreed to without amendment.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, having under consideration the bill to be intituled an Act to amend the Labour and Mobility Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed to same without amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
The Honourable Minister of Finance and Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, second by the Minister of Health, that the 6th order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Carried. Order number 6, an act to amend the Labour Act, Bill number 43, ordered for second reading.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Health, that the said bill be now read a second time.
Shall it carry?
Carried. Bill number 43, an act to amend the Labour Act, read a second time.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Health, that this House do now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry?
Carried.
The Honourable Member from Tignish Palmer Road, Deputy Speaker to Chair, please.
House is now in a committee of the whole House to take into consideration a bill to be intituled an Act to amend the Labour Act. A request has been made to bring a stranger onto the floor. Shall it be granted?
Granted.
Good evening. Would you please state your name and title for answer, please?
Patricia McPhail, Director of Labor and Industrial Relations.
Thank you very much. Promoter, would you like to commence with just a general statement on the bill's intent?
Thank you, Chair. Most provinces and the federal government have some form of special provisions for employers and bargaining agents to use to settle their first collective agreement when negotiations have been unsuccessful. The Federation of Labor has been asking the government to include first collective agreement arbitration in the Labor Act now for many years. After a meeting between myself and the Federation of Labor, I agreed to bring forward legislation that would allow for first collective agreement arbitration. Staff consulted with stakeholders from both labor and employment on a draft version of this bill.
It is now the pleasure of the committee that the bill be read clause by clause, section by section, or the bill as a whole.
Full bill.
Okay. Floor is now open for, we have Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Chair. So I want to acknowledge that it is wonderful to see this bill come forward. A little bit of history on this. So first contract arbitration legislation was actually passed in this legislature in 1994. but was never proclaimed. So at that time, we were really cutting edge. It was, PEI was really moving forward on this, one of the first provinces. Now, of course, since then, almost every province actually already has this type of legislation in place that will allow for arbitration of supports for, to get to a first contract. It's something that labor unions here on the island have been advocating for a very long time. But I would be remiss as a member of this legislature to allow this to go forward just as it is. So I do have a small amendment that I would like to bring forward to this bill.
Sure. Could you read your amendment for Hanford, please? And you also have copies?
Yes, there are copies. The clerk has copies.
Okay.
I move that, so section 3 of Bill 43 is deleted and the following substituted. Number 3, this act comes into force on the earlier of a date that may be fixed by proclamation of the Lieutenant Governor in Council or 180 days after the date of royal assent.
And thank you very much, member. We're just going to give a moment for pass out the amendment and give members a couple of minutes to read it. The floor is now open for discussion. I'll take questions on the amendment. Does anyone have any questions on the amendment? Shall the amendment carry? Carry. So we're going to move forward with the amendment, with the bill as amended. And the floor is open for questions. Shall the bill as amended carry? Carry. An act to amend the Labor Act. Shall it carry? Shall it carry?
Carry. I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry? Carry.
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report the bill agreed to with amendment.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, having under consideration the bill to be intituled, an act to amend the Labour Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed to same with amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to bring motion 91 forward.
Honourable members, do we have unanimous consent?
Yes.
Ready, Joe? Just a couple of minutes. Get a copy. We're just waiting for a copy.
Go grab the capital budget, I'll
Sure.
get that up, David.
Motion 91, working together to change the impaired driving culture in Prince Edward Island. The Honourable Minister of Justice and Public Safety moves, seconded by the Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness, the following motion. Whereas impaired driving is the leading cause of criminal injury and death in Canada, and whereas it has caused over hundreds of preventable tragedies across Prince Edward Island in the last decade, and whereas the province of Prince Edward Island has some of the most severe consequences to impaired driving in the country, including steep fines and jail time, and whereas despite an overall declining trend of impaired driving charges, impaired driving remains a significant problem for the island, therefore be it resolved that this Legislative Assembly encourage all islanders to help change complacent attitudes and behaviours that are contributing to impaired driving. Therefore, be it further resolved that this Legislative Assembly work together to find ways to curb these behaviours through government and community programs and services.
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Minister of Justice, Public Safety, and Attorney General to start debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today about impaired driving. I doubt there's anyone in this House that hasn't been impacted directly or indirectly by this. That's because impaired driving is a problem in Prince Edward Island, a big problem. We know that impaired driving is the leading cause of criminal injury in our country. We know impaired driving is dangerous, and we have to do things to stop it, but we can't do it alone. Public education campaigns, enforcements have led to overall decline trend, but what we see and hear is that it's still a problem. Just this past summer, there were preventable fatalities. PI has some of the most severe consequences for impaired driving in the country. Driving with a blood alcohol concentration of over 0.08% is a criminal offense, but we take it further here in Prince Edward Island. If you reach 0.05%, we can suspend your license for 24 hours. We can even cancel your license. We can impound your car, and we can require you to use ignition interlock devices. We can have all done these things, but it hasn't stopped impaired driving. These are good deterrents, but it doesn't seem like it's the solution. Which is obvious since we keep hearing about impaired driving in island communities. That's why earlier this month, I called on all islanders to help us change the culture around impaired driving. Could this be the solution? Maybe, maybe not. But it is another measure to tackle a very big problem in our society. It was eye-opening when I heard the RCMP commanding officer speak recently at the Standing Committee about the culture and complacent attitudes of islanders on impaired driving. Sometimes it takes a fresh set of eyes to shake things up and to call out some hard truths. But I believe in islanders, and I believe we are capable of doing things right, even if it's inconvenient. As I said, the severe consequences can be a wake-up call for first-time offenders, and it has worked often. But where we need to do more and better is for repeat offenders. obviously those consequences don't have the same effect. That's why we need Islanders to take active role to stop someone from getting behind the wheel. If you see your loved one impaired, don't dismiss it. It's just so and so, and they do this all the time. Don't let it be any time. Take their keys away. Call them a taxi, or someone who is sober, take them home. Don't risk it. Because anytime someone drives impaired, there are countless lives that could be impacted with that decision. It's the first responders who have come to the scene. It's the victim and their loved ones. It's community, and frankly, it's our province. The reason we focused on first responders from dispatchers, fire services, paramedics, to law enforcement, is because behind their uniform, there are Islanders we all know. They aren't nameless strangers. They are family, they are friends or neighbors. I can't imagine the toll it takes on them when they go to respond to these preventable tragedies. That's why I want us all to think about our actions. Even the smallest decisions can save a life. I am not naive to think that one public awareness campaign will solve all our problems, but we have to try. On May 15th, 2004, I lost my lifelong friend Dwayne Pound to a drunk driver, and the impact has touched me greatly, and the 16 years that have gone by, you wonder where he would be today. And I know he would have been a huge component to our island society, but I guess we'll never know. Mr. Speaker, like I said, I won't pretend that there is one solution. I am, like my colleagues here, well aware there's more work to be done. We're not going to solve the impaired driving today, but we can work together to find evidence-based solutions that can help Islanders change this big problem. I'm asking for your help. Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I start, I just want to say, this is the last thing I want to be speaking about in the Legislative Assembly here on PEI. We shouldn't be having to have this conversation. It befuddles me why we need to talk about this when it's obvious that no one should get behind the wheel of a motor vehicle impaired by any means. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you, and I want to thank the honourable member for bringing this important matter forward. Impaired driving, as you said, is something that affects our entire province. It's deeply concerning that it's still such a big problem here on our island. The Minister of Justice is right to be concerned. I'm concerned, and I bet every member in this House is concerned as well. When something happens in our province, Islanders have the unique ability to find a link to that event. We know that what happens up west is felt all the way down east. When there's cause for celebration, we do it together, just as when we hurt, we do it together. So I applaud the Minister and his department for trying this approach with Islanders to try and change the complacent attitudes towards impaired driving. He's right. It may or may not be the solution, but we do have to try. Lives can be on the line, and the fact is, one time is already one time too many. There's so much research and great advocacy work being done here, nationally and around the world, to better understand what pushes people to drink, to use, and to make those dangerous decisions that puts lives at risk. We don't need to recreate the wheel. We can rely on the experts who dedicate their lives to understanding this societal problem. We can't point the finger to one sole cause. That's because it's a complex issue with a host of factors. It could be a family history of substance abuse. It could be peer pressure. It could be complacency. It can be a traumatic event or a series of traumatic events. It can be any one of the number of things that leads to a person to get behind the wheel when they're impaired. But no matter what the reason, we have to find a way to help Islanders change this behavior. Changing behaviors is no small feat. There's a lot of work that goes behind making that decision to change. It's not a simple decision, and it requires a great deal of mental energy and fortitude to take that first step. Like any big decision we take in life, we have to be prepared as much as possible and be ready to take not just the first step, but the second, third, and every step afterwards as well. There may be hiccups and bumps in the road, and that's okay. But we have to keep looking ahead and remember the goal that we've set for ourselves. Everyone needs help at some point, and that's to be expected. I'm just noticing the siren going down the road, and you know, as a first responder yourself, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you've had to experience far too many situations that you had to respond to. I implore people to reach out for help. That can be with your loved ones, your friends, your community, government, or all of the above. If I'm honest, government always will get it. If I'm honest, will government always get it right for everyone? The real answer is no, because it's simply not realistic. We simply cannot be everything for everyone for every moment. But the tremendous women and men of the civil service work hard every single day to move the dial on how government can support Islanders. There's been many great initiatives taken over the last number of years. A lot of it headed up by MAD. And Mr. Speaker, I know that if you talk to the law enforcement officials that are on our roads, they'll tell you that the other initiative where there was a campaign to report a suspected impaired driver by calling 911, no doubt has saved lives and has taken some of these impaired drivers off the road before there was a serious incident. Mr. Speaker, as I said in my opening remarks, Islanders have a unique bond that propels us through life events together. It's the same bond that brings us together to help one another out. That's why I'm confident that the solution lies here in every one of us. When we work together, we can make big things happen. We can tackle those big societal problems like impaired driving because we want all our communities to be healthy and thriving. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to be seconding this motion because I believe in the people of this province. We're better than this, and we have every ability to turn things around. I hope that all members of this House will be joining this collective effort to eradicate impaired driving from our island roads. Now, the minister that brought this motion forward, again, I thank you for that, and he talked about a lifelong friend of his that lost his life much too short due to an impaired driver. I too, like many people, I'm sure everyone in this room knows of someone that their life was cut much too short. One of my closest friends growing up in Sherwood, his brother, 2 years our junior, was walking out to North River Rink to roller skate back when that was the fashion there. Unfortunately, on the North River Causeway, he was hit and killed by an impaired driver. I have one of my constituents just around the corner from my house. He also lost a son unnecessarily up near the university by an impaired driver. So this really comes home to roost. But you know what? We need to work on this. We need to support one another. If you happen to be out for a beverage, if you have people over to your house, do the right thing, take responsibility, and if you see somebody, ensure that they either aren't being overserved, aren't under the influence of another substance, and if they are, take their keys away, offer them or drive home, call them a cab. It's a heck of a lot easier to do that than to attend a funeral. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Minister of Fisheries and Communities.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think this is a topic that I know a little bit about. I can remember back in 1984 when I first started policing back in Woodstock, New Brunswick. And I can remember back then, how would you say it? It was socially acceptable. And nobody really gave it a second thought. But I think we've grown from beyond that. I can remember my first impaired driver in, it was 1985 in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. And the vehicle was crossing the line. It was a station wagon. And it was over on Wentworth Street, I believe. And the guy made several passages across the yellow line. And I pulled him over. He went scooted behind the school, and I pulled him over. And I went up and I opened the door, and he literally fell out. And I remember we took him down to Dartmouth Police Station, and I remember the family coming in. And I remember the wife crying, and the impact that it had on her. Drinking and driving, drinking is an addiction. It is a sickness, but I think we've made great strides over the years of offering different solutions that can help these people in need. But I think it's important to know that it takes a toll on a lot of people, and I think that this is a community thing, as the Minister of Justice talked about. The Minister of Health also mentioned it. We all need to help. We all need to offer drives home, take keys from people that are going to, suggest another means of transportation or way home. I can remember so many countless times when whether it be at a traffic accident. Harold Harley, I remember him. Harold Harley was a lifelong friend of Dad's. He owned a tow truck business in Woodstock, and Harold lost his life to an impaired driver. He was out one night in a snowstorm trying to help a woman that was stuck, and an impaired driver took out Harold. And I remember how the effect, the devastation it had on Dad, because Dad was so close to Harold. And I remember so much about this topic. Like, people would come to my house in the middle of the night and they'd wake me up and offer to take, would you drive me home? And I never hesitated, and I always thought that was the proper thing to do. And it took Debbie a little while to get used to that, because people would come to the house and they'd wake us up and ask if they could get a drive home. And I think that was part of community policing, and that those things should happen. I tend to, it gets emotional sometimes when you think of the effect it has on families and people that suffer from this addiction, and we try as a society to educate them, and we try to provide them every means of help, but people still drink and drive, and I think we can be better. I think we shouldn't be afraid to stop somebody from drinking and driving. We shouldn't be afraid to make the phone call if we know them to a family member and get somebody to come help. We shouldn't feel bad about calling the RCMP or calling the local police and reporting an impaired driver. I think it's the right thing to do. You might not know somebody. You might be in a bar some night or at a restaurant, and you see somebody themselves at the bar or wherever, and you see them heading for the vehicle. And it might just take, the conversation, can I help you? Can I make sure you get home tonight? Can I call you a taxi? And I often wondered sometimes when even up to today, the odd time I'll be driving somewheres and I'll see people driving, and I'll recognize habits or the way they drive down the road, and I'll wonder myself, are they drinking and driving? And I've made numerous calls, and because I don't want to see anybody hurt, and it always, it affects you when you have to respond to the Maxons. And then you might have to go to another family's house and give them some bad news of what transpired or what took place. And it affects a police officer too when you're dealing with these individuals and they ask you for help. And I cannot give them legal advice. I can only give them their rights and advise them of police caution and provide them the opportunity to call a lawyer or call an advocate. And you want to give them advice of what they can do, but you can't. But one thing you can always suggest is, yeah, you can call a lawyer, call anybody you want. If you want to call a family member, call a family member. And have a chat and try to get them supports that they need. And that's one thing I always tried to do was to, and I told the other guys the same thing, that if we can help somebody and educate them and get them over this and make sure they get home then safe, then let's do it. And I can remember times that we'd stop somebody from getting into a vehicle, and I can remember one night I drove to Montague, took a guy home. And I remember calling up the East Prince Detachment, back then it was Borden or Carlton Detachment, the old barracks out there in Dickey Road, or out in the Highway 10, and I remember Brian London and Pierre Regrelli and all them guys. They used to, yeah, go ahead, Jamie, drive the guy home, and we'll take care of the district. We'll make sure that if there is a call, you know, that the area will be covered. And I think that was the right thing to do, and I think that as a society we can be better. We can help these people, we can help their families, and we can try to reduce impaired driving. It's not socially accepted. And I think that anything we can do as a legislative assembly to help the Minister of Justice and our island police departments and MAD Canada and these different organizations, we should be stepping forth and doing it. I think that we're at a point where we've lost too many in the past. And I think it's our responsibility to give the police and our support workers and our addiction services and our healthcare workers and our first responders the supports they need to help curb this when it takes place. I'd go home sometimes after catching an impaired driver and say, all he had to do was come ask for help, and we would have tried to help him. And then I remember calls on the good side when people would call us back or call you back or stop at the house and say, you know, thanks for getting me some help last night, or thanks for taking the keys away from me. And I think at the end, I guess in closing, I just say that I think we all can help in this regard, every one of us, across the whole island. And I think sometimes it just takes somebody to step forward and actually say that. Can I help you? So with that, Mr. Speaker, I support this motion. I support anything we can do to make our roads more safe for our traveling public and to get the help that some people need when they need it the most. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown West Royalty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's great to listen to this debate, and I think it's a very important one. Research shows that having a blood alcohol level of between 0.05 and 0.8% shows that driving in that range means that driver is 7 times more likely to be in a fatal car crash than having no alcohol in their system. And you think about that and what this means, and the minister said it too, is our consequences, and I've looked at this, and I've looked at this legislation, and I see the consequences, and when you look at that legislation, you're very surprised at the severity of it. But like the constable said that was in front of the standing committee, that it's a cultural issue, and when she said that, you know, to see it in her eyes, she meant it. She meant that there's a severe problem on Prince Edward Island, and she sees way too much, and I'm very worried about that. And you know, we talk about we talk about the issue and what we do to it, but we're a little bit slow on solutions. And, you know, I don't know, my friend from Tignish Palmer Road, I think that we need not look any further than what he has done in his constituency around drinking and driving, and how he's changed that and how he's helped out his constituents. And that is what I look to as a positive example of how we can move forward and how we can do something consequentially. So this is something that we can't risk one or two times, and that's it. It's too many. So we have to start to think about and discuss about zero tolerance and what that looks like in Prince Edward Island, because when you have cultural problems, how do you change that? The community definitely needs to help, and I think they're doing that, but I think I'm so worried about what COVID has done to the way we travel and the way we get together and the way we might go to a house party and how that changes things. Instead of going down to a certain area, you're going to different areas that at one point people want to get home and it only takes a split second. We have to be better at that. We have to watch our community and find out how COVID has affected those numbers. As the constable said, there's less people on the island because of tourism, but our numbers around drunk driving have gone up. And those two issues don't match. It means that people on the island are not changing their culture. Something's going on, and there's issues coming about. I think that to the minister, as we were talking to, we need to really start to look at some best practices. I know BC just changed theirs, and their numbers have gone down quite dramatically. How and why did they do that? And as well, I mean, there's parties here, and all of us 27 want this to change. I mean, it's a time to, you know, get together and talk about this, because we have to make this change. I support this motion, and I do believe we have a lot of work to do. This is a social problem. This is a problem in our communities, and I'd be more than willing to help, and I do support this motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Tignish Palmer Road, and the Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I wish I didn't have to stand and speak to this issue, but the reality is that impaired driving is still a huge problem here on Prince Edward Island. And as my colleague from Charlottetown West Royalty had mentioned earlier about what I was doing in my own community, well, we can all do something to change the behaviour, Mr. Speaker. When I first got elected in 2011, this was always a concern of mine, but I thought now that my profile was raised a bit, I had a platform, I was going to see what I could do to bring awareness to this issue. I had teenage boys at that time, so there was many different facets as to why I wanted to do this. And I wanted to teach those, my children, that there is a responsibility that comes with a driver's license. Sorry, to give back to my community, I did a designated driving service over the holidays. It was actually New Year's Eve, the first year it started. And I had an overwhelming response that night. And the feedback that I got from all of the people that I drove was very, very positive. And it made me say, yeah, you know, this is worthwhile. Even if I could take one person, just taking one person off the street and making our roads a little bit safer, made me feel like I accomplished something, Mr. Speaker. So I continue to do it over, well, for the past, this will be 10 years coming up this December, and I will be doing it. Again, just to try to do what I can to give back to the community, to raise awareness that you have to plan ahead, Mr. Speaker. Whether you live in an urban area where you have public transit, or you live in a rural area, Prince Edward Island, like I do, where we don't have taxis or we don't have a public transit. So it's very important to plan ahead. And I'm very encouraged by the younger generation, and I do drive many of those individuals home, not only New Year's Eve. I do this probably 20 weekends a year, I'm sure. And people actually now book me for weddings to drive people home. And I do it. And I do it because I feel I have a responsibility. I started this, I have to finish it, you know. And but it makes me feel good, you know, to do that. And again, my children grew up doing the same thing too. They were designated drivers, not all the time, But if they were going to party a little bit, they planned ahead. They would never get into a vehicle with someone else who was drinking behind the wheel. They always had a designated driver or some alternative way home. And I'm very encouraged also by parents who are telling their children, we will not judge you, we will not say anything to you. If you need to drive home, give us a call. We don't care if it's 3 o'clock in the morning. So to those parents, I really do think they are making a difference also. Because when I was growing up, you always tried to hide everything from your parents. and you did. So now parents are more accepting, they're more understanding, and they realize that they have to do something to try to curb this behavior. And it's something that that I do appreciate, and I do see it happening and making a bit of a change. Unfortunately, we need to do more, Mr. Speaker, because our roads are still not safe. I would love to see, as the member from Charlottetown West Road said, zero tolerance. Zero tolerance for getting behind any vehicle impaired. And what we have to do as a society is to make everyone aware of that there is zero tolerance. We have to make our roads safer. We should be reporting anyone that gets behind the wheel. If we can't take the keys from that person, we can't physically stop them and take the keys from them, and they insist on driving and take off, report them. That's what I tell everyone. Report them. We have an obligation because of that person who, for some unknown reason, I don't know if they're invincible or what have you, but they take that vehicle and they hurt someone else, Mr. Speaker, then we're responsible. Because we had an opportunity to make a choice, and we chose either to sit back and let it happen, take the chances, or we could have called and reported them to take that person off our road. So again, I just want to say I will do whatever I can to help anyone in this room with a plan. I will help with the government, whatever I can do. I help in my community already, and I will do whatever I can to change the behavior, to change the culture of Islanders so that we can make our roads here in Prince Edward Island as safe as possible. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this motion, and I appreciate the words that have preceded me from the various members who came forward, the mover, the seconder, and those who have spoken since then. I understand why perhaps the Minister of Justice and Public Safety would have moved this motion, because we've treated addictions and mental health as a justice issue all along. When I saw that the Minister of Health and Wellness was seconding the issue, I was encouraged. I thought that we might hear some words about the complexity of mental health and addictions and the role that plays when it comes to impaired driving. I was disappointed I did not hear that. I heard a reiteration of the points and arguments made by the Justice Minister. Good points, absolutely good points. But many have said in the debate thus far this evening that Prince Edward Island has some of the most punitive measures present, in fact, the most punitive measures of any province. And yet, we have an alarmingly high impaired driving rate. I'm a big fan of evidence-based decision-making, and it suggests to me that punitive measures are not getting to the heart and soul of this problem. This is a wicked problem. It's like many wicked problems that we face in this world, whether that be poverty, climate change, Indigenous reconciliation, and mental health and addictions. There is no simple, single solution to any of these problems. They are deeply embedded in various layers of our society. And if we hope to have a truly effective approach to resolving any of those issues, it's going to take a much deeper understanding than simply zero tolerance, for example. We know that does not work. We know that doesn't work. We know punitive measures do not work. We need to look deeper than that. We need to understand what is behind addictions. Our whole caucus recently made several trips through the districts that we represent. One day in particular stands out for me in relation to this motion this evening. And it was a day where we started at the food bank, the upper room here in Charlottetown, and we learned of the number of people who use that food bank. We then went to the Reach Foundation in Stratford and heard about the great work they are doing there to help young people afflicted with addictions, and how difficult it is to support those young people, how the solutions to preventing those young people from being the impaired drivers that cause all of the distress, all of the carnage, all of the distress, all of the horrors that we have heard about this evening. How do we stop that? How do we create barriers to prevent people becoming those impaired drivers? There is no simple solution to that. We also went to SAFE. I can't think what the acronym for that is. Sober and Friendly Environment, I think it is, run by Sister Laura Kelly, an extraordinary human being who runs out of the goodness of her heart, a place, again, for people with addictions, mental health and addiction problems, to go on a daily basis, no questions asked, no judgments made. Opportunities for those people who are struggling with mental health and addictions to be heard, to be seen, to be supported, to be given an opportunity to move away from the situation they are in. And I think it's really, really important that we understand we never know where people are. We never know what is going on in their lives. We never know, or rarely know, what has caused them the distress which has led them to a situation where they are addicted. Lennon House is a beautiful example of an institution which I believe understands truly and deeply and at its core the nature of addictions and mental health. And it's important we understand it's always mental health and addictions. Those two things are not separate. They are intimately linked. And when you see the approach that Diane Young and Steve Guy and the others up in Lennon House in Rustico are bringing to addictions and mental health, you start to understand how complicated this is, how difficult it is to resolve, and how deep-seated the issues that people who do drink and drive or are impaired in other ways or use drugs in other ways, how difficult it is to resolve that. Lennon House has only been open for a short time, and I'm going to take this opportunity to thank government for coming forward with the funding to finish the capital work that needed to be done there, but more importantly, the operational funding to allow that institution to start doing the extraordinarily important work that they are doing. I really hope that becomes a long-term, stable, core, operational funding agreement with Lennon House, because again, I look at the people there, I look at Diane and Steve and the others, many of whom, the staff there, have themselves lived through addictions and come out the other side and can truly be empathetic supporters of the young people who end up there. We have so many wonderful institutions. Almost all of the ones that I've just described are in part funded by government, but they're also heavily reliant on volunteers. These are institutions that are, while again, in part funded by government, they fill in the gaps, the systemic gaps that exist in our society that allow people to fall through. And those gaps begin very early. If we want to truly tackle impaired driving, we have to look at a very young age, and we have to put in the supports, the resources, the money, the human resources required to, as much as we can, remove the social determinants of health, the poverty that causes so many of the problems which emerge later in life. We have terrible poverty here on Prince Edward Island. I'm looking forward very much to the work of the special committee and the recommendations that they bring forward. And I think there are tremendous opportunities here on Prince Edward Island to be the first place to institute a basic income guarantee, something that would absolutely transform the lives of those people who currently live in poverty. I'm not suggesting poverty is the only problem which leads to addictions, not at all. As I said at the very beginning, this is multi-layered, it's complex, it's intertwined with so many things which are terribly difficult to understand and therefore terribly difficult to resolve. But one clear and present thread in so many people who have addiction issues is poverty. We have a government that made a platform promise to make alcohol available in all convenience stores. And I remember asking the Premier some questions about this, and to your credit, Mr. Premier, you admitted in question period that you had reservations about that platform promise that you made. I wish we had governments that could think coherently and congruently and understand that all policies are connected. We cannot make decisions and bring forward policies that benefit, for example, small convenience stores if there are large societal and human costs associated with providing alcohol out of those places. And studies show that the more available alcohol is, the more likely you are to have addiction issues. There are some places, I'm not suggesting that we should go back to the days of prohibition, absolutely not. But I do think that we need, as a government, to understand the connections that we make when policy is brought forward. And there is a very clear connection here between that misguided policy of the platform document of 2019 and the issue that we're talking about today. Treating addictions is extraordinarily difficult. I talked a little bit a minute ago about Lennon House. Their success rate, and again, they are new to this, but they have modeled their facility on other institutions in other provinces where a success rate of 50% is considered to be extraordinarily good. And that's after months and months and months of counseling, of peer group discussions, of one-on-one love and care from the people who are there. So even with that amount of input, it's terribly difficult to overcome addiction and mental health issues. There are no easy solutions to this. And while I will support this motion, I absolutely will, because we all have to do our part. We all have to, in this legislative assembly and within the community of Prince Edward Island, contribute to the motion says, complacent attitudes and behaviours that are contributing to impaired driving. But I think that only tells a small part of the story. I think we also have to understand that this is a much deeper issue, a much more complicated issue, and that if we are to treat addictions and mental health issues appropriately and effectively, we have to look right down within the foundations of society and do all that we can to bring forward policies and legislation that will support our community and the individuals in our community who need the help to escape from the cycle of addictions. I feel I have talked around this issue and not come to any conclusion, and perhaps that's not surprising. This is extraordinarily complicated. And again, I want to reiterate that I will support this motion, but I think it's important for everybody in this House to understand that there's a superficiality in my mind to this motion that does not truly recognize the complexity and the depth of addictions and how we as a society can ultimately deal with that and hopefully eradicate it from our communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I wasn't sure that I was going to get up and speak, but the Honourable Health Minister mentioned a neighbour of his whose son was lost to a drunk driver, and that son was my nephew. And I'll circle back to 1991. It's Friday night of Thanksgiving, and we're living in Maine. And I get a call about 10:30 saying Michael was killed. Michael Miller He was walking out by UPEI. He was struck by an impaired RCMP officer who was coming from the mess. And back in 1991, my understanding was RCMP officers could serve themselves in the bar. And his parents, Karen and Scott Miller, worked diligently to have that changed, that now a bartender has to serve drinks if they're going to drink in the mess. And I think that's still the case. Maybe they can't drink there anymore. I'm not quite sure, but I can tell you the impact it had on our family. I had to wake our children up, and tell them that the oldest grandchild was killed, and Russ was away, and we had to get home from Maine for the funeral, and it was devastating. He was 16, and he'd be 45 today, and we think about what he would have been like and what he would have done, and his sister is Megan Miller, Dr. Miller, who's at the Cancer Center, and they're a strong family, and they got through it, and the impacts are unbelievable. There is no easy answer to this. As the Minister of the Liquor Commission, I struggle with this about expanding availability of liquor, but I look back to when I was a child. I think most people in this room would understand there was no lack of liquor, and from where I lived, you had to drive to Cardigan or Charlottetown, and there never seemed to be any lack of availability. But the impact on our family, this past June, Jacob Simmons was killed. A neighbor, his grandmother lives 2 kilometers away. I know his family. My heart breaks for them, for Brenda, for Jana. And to lose Jacob and then 6 weeks later lose his father to cancer is devastating. I understand the person that hit him has addiction issues, and it was stated. The lives that have been ruined by that, there's no end to it, Mr. Speaker, and I don't mean to be so emotional, but it's impacted our lives. I could go back to 1997. It was my 16th birthday. We were coming home from a movie, and we happened upon an accident. 2 neighbors, a husband and wife, and the wife was killed, and Russ tried to resuscitate her. They were coming from the Legion. It was a winter storm, so there were a number of factors, but again, lives that were impacted forever. For their children, the husband lived, but the wife was killed. The other driver was a friend, a teenager. We can all tell these stories, but I just want to say, as someone who has a family member who was killed, it changes your life forever. And I think as an assembly, we all need to work together to ensure that we make all the right decisions. And I want to thank the minister for bringing this forward. It's just one piece, and there are many pieces. There are addictions, there are mental health. We all know, we just had Remembrance Day, we know the impact of mental health and addictions to all our veterans, and how I know when I was a child, a number of the veterans we knew, alcohol was a way of coping. They didn't want to talk about what they went through. It was a way of coping. And we can't even come to guess what their lives were like and how their lives were impacted by what they went through. So there are just so many facets to this problem, Mr. Speaker, and I more than support the motion. I suggest that each and every one of us dig down deep to figure out how we as an assembly can make changes that are really impactful. And thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate all the comments that have been made here this evening as I've been sitting and listening. And as the honourable member mentioned, we've all been touched by this in one way or another. Being a teacher, losing a student to drinking and driving is a pretty tough pill to swallow. So, you know, as the Leader of the Official Opposition mentioned, we need to understand the root causes of drinking and driving. Punitive measures don't work. And, you know, when I hear people say, you know, we've got the most punitive consequences in the country, it's clearly not working, and it won't work. And so I'll use this opportunity to say, once again, I feel like a bit of a broken record, and this is another example where we can put this, but we need to put our money where our mouth is, and we need to invest in early intervention and prevention and education. The childhood abuse rates in this province are through the roof. The amount of children we have walking through our school systems living with childhood trauma that is never, ever addressed. The family violence rates in this province are through the roof. Addictions rate, mental health issues, there's no surprise because childhood trauma is one of the most entangled things that you can have with mental health and addictions. Until we get real about treating childhood abuse or childhood trauma, until we get real about addressing what we addressed in question period this afternoon, until we have island-wide transit, until we address poverty, until we start using and respecting and truly using, but not just paying lip service to trauma-informed approaches in every system in this province, we are going to be dealing with drinking and driving. So, of course, I support this motion, but I also acknowledge that there are some really hard truths that we need to look right in the face. And you know, based on decisions made during the pandemic, I hope that we're really ready to do that. I'm going to choose to be cautiously optimistic here, but we all know that changing the culture on PEI that has been like this for centuries, I'm sure, again, as the honourable member mentioned, I'm sure most of us are not that far removed, myself included, from poverty and extreme family addictions. And so until we are really ready to face those hard truths and deal with these things from the root, we can't keep putting Band-Aid on these things. We can't keep throwing fines at people. We can't keep throwing them in jail. We can't keep making these things worse and worse and worse in hopes it's going to work, because it's just not. So I support the motion, fully acknowledging it's going to take a lot more than this. We need to roll up our sleeves and do the work and understand the work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had no intention of speaking to this motion tonight, but I have been listening to the debate, and I simply must. First, I thank the Finance Minister for her remarks. I think it's really hard to be vulnerable in a space like this, and I think it takes incredible courage and bravery to stand up and talk from your heart and be vulnerable, so good for you. I have great respect for that, and I don't mind telling you I do. I don't think that any of us in this space have not lost somebody as a result of drinking and driving. I certainly have. I lost my cousin. I can tell the story of the 4-year-old girl he left behind and the story of what her life was. Won't tell that story today. But the point is, we've all experienced this. We all know what that's like. And I'm willing to bet we all also know someone who has suffered with addictions. Someone who, when they hear stories of people who have been struck and killed as a result of a drunk driver, cringe and pray that they are not the person who causes this, but they know they have addictions problems. We are all standing up in this house and really passionate about talking about wanting to do something about this issue. Let us be equally as passionate about finding the solutions. We know that they are there. Just taking people's keys, that's great in the moment. That is a perfect thing to do in that moment, but it denies all of what brought that person to that space in the first place. My colleague talked about trauma, and we have so much trauma in this province and in this country that we need to address. And until we're prepared to do that work, this is lip service. I stand in support of this motion, but I want it to be coupled with a recognition that just talking about drinking and driving as if it's a justice issue is missing the point in its entirety. That I think we have to be talking about mental health in this province. We have to be talking about addictions in this province. We have to talk about all of the system level gaps that we have in this province. I love seeing motions like this come forward. I wish I heard every one of my colleagues equally as enthusiastic about digging into the solutions to these system level gaps as we are about wanting to take keys, as we are about wanting to offer drives. I think those things are important. But we have a unique opportunity as legislators. I think everyone in the community who takes keys, everyone in the community who calls a cab, everyone in the community who offers themselves in that space is doing a wonderful service. That's not good enough for us. There are 27 of us in this space who have the opportunity to dig deep and do big things. Let's not miss that opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Brighton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When our son grew up and became high school age, we, like Hal, feared for his life, and he was not allowed to go to any party. Driving with anybody, or driving himself, there was us, either my wife and myself, taking him there and taking him back whenever that occurred. After a year of that, my wife and I got a little bit tired of that, and we also like to have a drink ourselves. Hardly anything is gained if we would drive drunk and pick him up. So we got this ingenious idea to give him an account at a taxi cab, and told him that, you know, he could use that service. We set it up there to drive out and drive home whenever, just by calling the cab, and it worked really well. I think our son felt that he got extra prestige by having his own cab account, and if he was going home, of course, he filled up the cab with other friends that was in a similar situation. It worked all really well until his classmates got onto it, and we found out that everybody in the class was charging their cab drives to the cab company. Which takes me to sort of more of a suggestion. We just think of, you know, how many lives of even if just one life was saved by having a taxi cab account. I agree with our honourable leader that more punitive measures are not working. But what about, you know, starting with, for instance, requiring that any bar in town, as a matter of fact, to let customers in, have to have a shuttle service that take them home. That it's all pre-arranged. They don't have any other option. To make it coutume, if you have a party, whether it be in the suburbs or in the country, that again, it's set up. There's a service that will take everybody home at a given time. I think we need measures like that. It may take legislation, it may take goodwill, but I may take change of habit. But I have more faith in making transportation available than to stop people from drinking. Thank you.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Belvedere, and the opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll keep my remarks brief. I think we've heard a lot of different perspectives this evening from members in the House. There's a couple of comments that I wanted to reiterate. One from my colleague from this side of the House. Sorry, one of those days. It's been a long day, Mr. Speaker. We're tired. That there is a cultural challenge or a cultural perspective, I think, in PEI around drinking and driving, which is one of the key things that we're up against, along with the sort of the inherent issues that come with us dealing with mental health and addictions, as the Leader of the Opposition stated. But I also really want to reiterate my colleague from Summerside Wilmot, which is that unless we specifically address those systemic issues, we're not going to be able to move this forward. We're just going to be sitting in the House sharing really difficult stories at the end of a long day, and then we'll do something new tomorrow. And I don't think that's what any of us want to do as legislators. When we stand up and we speak in here, we want this to actually mean something. And I'm really struck by the last phrase in the motion, where we talk about finding ways to curb these behaviours through government and community programs and services. That's the bit where we can actually take our words and turn them into action and commit to doing things that have tangible impact. And we've heard some of those suggestions already from other members in the House, be that investing in the community partners who can do way better than we can as government in delivering those frontline services, whether it be Lennon House or the Mental Health Association or the education programs that happen in our schools. I don't know about you, but kids, unfortunately, I sound like an old person, but kids these days are doing things younger. We need to be reaching kids as early as we possibly can, and probably earlier than we're comfortable with, about the messages around not only the dangers of the scary stuff around drinking and driving and operating a vehicle under the influence, but also about mental health. And that if they are troubled and need help, that they can and should reach out. That language of reaching is part of our education that we need to get comfortable with. And it's not just adults that need to do that, it's absolutely kids that need to do that too. And we need to get to them before it gets to the point of, as we've heard, of them being behind a wheel, because then it's far too late. So there are some quick and straightforward suggestions that we have already heard from a number of different members in the House, and they include early education. They include investment in public transportation, ride sharing, and public access to transportation that gives alternatives, whether that be a taxi chit or a ride share. We need more support for education on mental health, wellness, and addictions. We need to address the things that are hard for us to talk around those cultural changes that say that this may have been okay, but now it isn't, and how difficult that is when it's cross-generational. We need to talk about the resources and services that we should be investing and spending to begin to address this at the source and not at the outcome. Because as my friend said on just recently, if we're going to intervene by the time somebody's behind the wheel, it's way too late. So thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to speak this evening. And again, we actually have to commit to doing more than just talking about it. We have to commit to putting, as we said, putting some money into this, some thought into this, and understanding that these are complex problems that have long-term outcomes. The sooner we invest, the sooner we'll start seeing those outcomes, and we'll begin to change this story. So we're not talking about this again in 20 years in this House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Tyne Valley, Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to say that I really appreciate the debate and discussion in this House this evening. I think, as the Honourable Leader of the Opposition stated, this is a wicked problem. It is a problem that has impacted all of us in one way or another, and the answers are not easy. But to engage in this conversation in the legislature in the genuine way that I'm seeing it engaged in tonight, I think is incredible and so important. I want to highlight something that I've been thinking about as I've been sitting here listening to these discussions, and I want to share an experience, something that I heard recently from a constituent who told me that they had to wait for 3 weeks to be able to enter detox. And I think we have to think about that because that is someone who is in that moment, who is ready, who is making a choice, a positive choice, who is ready to heal and needs to be supported in those first steps toward addressing issues that they're facing with addiction. And if we are not prepared to help people in those moments when they are making those choices that are going to be a benefit to themselves, to their families, to our communities, to this island, then we have to take a serious step back and ask ourselves, what are we really doing to make sure that issues of addiction and drinking and driving is serious? It is an impact of addiction. It is something that is a decision that is made in a moment that is it is a terrible decision. We all know this. It is dangerous and it is heartbreaking. It can cause so much harm, and it has caused so much harm. That is a moment when someone is making a bad decision. but we need to be there when people are ready to make those decisions that are going to have the positive impacts on their lives. And I am concerned that we have a serious lack of opportunities for people to get the help they need when they need it. And if we're going to take this issue seriously, we need to improve that access. As well as all of the other pieces that have already been stated tonight around looking at transportation and, you know, what are we doing to ensure that people have choices and options so that they are not, again, making a bad decision in a bad moment that will cause endless and just the harm that can never be repaired. So, Mr. Speaker, I just want to say that I do support this motion, and as was stated by several of my colleagues, the last part about what government and community programs and services, looking at what we can do, I think that's where we really need to put our focus, because if we focus only on the blame and the shaming of those who have addictions, then we will never address the root causes. And if we really want to address this issue, we've seen that just focusing on punitive measures, I mean, we have the most severe consequences for impaired driving in the country here in PEI, and it hasn't worked. It's not enough. We need to be compassionate and we need to act with care. And I'm hopeful, after a discussion like this tonight, I'm hopeful that as a legislature and our government, that we can make this a priority. And I want to be a part of that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, honorable members, did I miss anyone? No? Okay, we'll go back to the mover of the motion to close debate, and that's the Minister of Agriculture, Land, Minister of Justice, Public Safety, and Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and this was a great conversation we had tonight by everyone in this legislature tonight, and as I stated in my response, Mr. Speaker, I asked for help, and it seems like everyone in this room is up for the challenge to help out to solve this problem, and therefore I call for a vote, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, a call for the vote. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. All those against the motion, please raise your hands. Honorable members, that was a very nice topic. It's a topic that I wish I could be debating, but unfortunately I can't. It's an emotional one for me also. I've been a member on all sides of your motion, and it's because of it, it's the person I am today, and I'm proud of it. Honorable members, your motion passed unanimously. The Honorable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like unanimous consent to bring motion 84 to the floor.
Honorable members, do we have unanimous consent? Oh, sorry. The Honorable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier. Oh, 84?
84.
Okay, unanimous consent is not required. Why? It was introduced last session. Yes.
Do I do again? Do I do over?
Honorable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Health, that motion 84 be now read.
Shall it carry?
The Minister of Health and Wellness moves, seconded by the member for Morel-Donagh, the following motion. Whereas essential workers provide services that, if interrupted, would endanger the life, health, or personal safety of the whole or part of the population. And whereas essential workers across Prince Edward Island have continued to support Islanders by providing food, supplies, financial support, utilities, and various other services. And whereas through uncertain times, essential workers have bravely gone to work each day to ensure others have the supplies, supports, and services they need most. Therefore be it resolved that the members of the Legislative Assembly show appreciation for all essential workers across the province for their dedication, hard work, and compassion through the COVID-19 pandemic.
Call on the Minister of Health and Wellness to start debate.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I have such respect and admiration for essential healthcare workers here across Prince Edward Island. Each of these hard-working, passionate, and dedicated workers constantly puts the needs of their patients and their families first. Mr. Speaker, I, of course, need to recognize two very important essential workers who have been leading us with expertise, compassion, and dedication throughout this pandemic. And, of course, I speak of Dr. Heather Morrison and Marion Dowling. And I think as we speak, they're actually receiving a special honor from the Rotary Club here in Charlottetown. Dr. Morrison has said time and time again, there is no guidebook for a pandemic. Decisions are made based on evidence, research, and learning. What we can as the virus touched other places around the world. These two leaders, along with their teams, and I have to stress teams because Marion and Heather are amazing leaders, but you know what? They have incredible people working behind the scenes with them, doing incredible things. These teams have been doing a fantastic job working through every challenge that has come their way and making tough decisions in the best interest of all Islanders. And we are extremely, extremely lucky to have them. Mr. Speaker, healthcare workers care for Island patients in a variety of healthcare settings across PEI. Primary care, hospitals, home care, long-term care, community care, and the list goes on and on. The COVID-19 pandemic changed the way we do a lot of things here on PEI, but the high quality of health care we offer has not wavered. When a lot of other businesses and services halted, our essential health care services continued, and in some cases, they ramped up. Mr. Speaker, we've had healthcare workers that have introduced innovative, new, outside-the-box thinking that have enabled Islanders to receive healthcare in a variety of new and innovative ways. Our healthcare workers have adapted swiftly to our new normal. When we switched to essential services, we deployed our healthcare workers where they were needed most. Throughout this uncertain time, healthcare workers put their own worries aside to ensure the patients and the families were cared for and supported. With the support of healthcare workers, we have been able to quickly test Islanders experiencing COVID-19 symptoms at our various drive-through clinics and essentially set up for essential workers, but then it was expanded for others. Dr. Greg German and his team have been working diligently to process COVID-19 tests in the lab each and every day. And if we remember back to the early days of this pandemic, PEI was in a unique situation where we had to take our swabs and send them to the lab in Winnipeg. But Mr. Speaker, our dedicated, high-quality, qualified lab staff, led by Dr. Greg German, were able to turn that around where we were able to do those tests here locally in our own labs and get the results back in a much, much quicker capacity. Mr. Speaker, there are so many key players within the health system who have not only kept things going, but expanded and adapted services in our time of need, and it is truly impressive. Prince Edward Island has done a fantastic job containing the spread of COVID-19, and a big part of that success has been the hard work and dedication behind the scenes of our healthcare workers. Mr. Speaker, our healthcare workers have stepped up in a time of need that many of us never imagined we would ever experience. For patients that are unable to be seen in person, our healthcare system has made innovative changes to the way we deliver services so that they may continue with minimal disruption. Mr. Speaker, with visitor restrictions in place, our healthcare workers went out of their way to ensure patients were connecting any way they could with their loved ones. Video chats and window visits, only to name a couple. Healthcare workers and PEI truly care about and want the best for their patients. I've heard many stories of healthcare staff going above and beyond for patients and their families. It's just not a job, it's a calling. And it is not a career path just anyone is cut out for. It takes a very special individual to do this type of work. Mr. Speaker, it goes without saying that essential workers are extremely important. And throughout a global health crisis like COVID-19, our healthcare workers are especially important. I'm extremely proud to have such an accomplished, dedicated team caring for patients in our province. I know I speak for all Islanders when I share my gratitude and appreciation. Thank you.
Now we'll ask the seconder of the motion, the honourable member from Morel Donagh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am happy to second this motion. Appreciation for essential workers throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, and the minister, spoke about a number of our essential services that especially the public service, those essential workers in health and our utilities and janitorial and cleaning, Mr. Speaker. But it's amazing what has changed in these past number of months and the new terminology. And I remember distinctly when I was with my 9-year-old daughter, and she started saying, essential worker, and it just became part of the vocabulary. And I remember her saying, Dad, are you an essential worker? And it was close to the time that we were deemed essential workers, and I had to laugh at it because, I was working from home. And I remember distinctly, and we all did, the first time you go to a gas station or to the grocery store. COVID has, and seeing, the real essential workers, COVID has forced us to rethink what constitutes essential work. The food retail and the pharmacy staff and the delivery and truck drivers. I wasn't forced to make that difficult decision. That these essential workers that have, about having to go to work, and it's about balancing your own economic position versus your own personal and family safety. And I think when you were forced to make that decision, that is truly defined as an essential worker, Mr. Speaker. I see it's 9 o'clock. I'll adjourn debate now, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, debate has been adjourned and the hour has been called. I'll call on the member from Morel Donagh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the member from Montague-Kilmere, that this House do adjourn until November 13th, Friday the 13th at 10 o'clock a.m.
Shall it carry? Carry.